Probably the biggest misconception when it comes to supports is the way players and teams think they're meant to protect them, specifically with regards to positioning. Obviously the supports are really important, a lot of potential and so on, but they're also generally the squishiest heroes on the team, especially for those immobile ranged supports like Zen or Ana who we do see quite a lot. And because of this, setting up your supports while also taking down their supports is often the overarching win condition for both teams, especially in those more spread out comps like Dive. Players of course know this, so they try to protect them. But the way so many players try to do this is by getting that support to clump up with the core of their team, with the idea that they can act as these sort of melee ranged bodyguards. This is really ineffective for a load of reasons, and those ranged supports are pretty uncomfortable that far up. First off, it massively limits their LOS, meaning they can't react to teammates outside the main group who need help, or react to enemies pressuring the flanks. Both that and the support's proximity to the front line almost negates the enemy team's need to stage, as enemies can just jump in from safety without ever having to work past any of your team. Plus, their bad LOS means they can't contest flankers themselves from range, and can't help teammates in their skirmishes for map control, enabling the enemy team to take the flanks for pretty much free. Remember too, this contributes a lot to clumping up your team, making any enemy engages much more effective, as you're in this tight little bundle that's easy for the enemy to surround, and easy to get poke onto, with those supports far up enough to take a bunch of trash damage. But this also makes it easy to catch the bulk of your team in a single dive, and this is obviously really bad, not just because of AoE damage from heroes like Winston and Hammond, but more because it ties everyone up in the brawl and makes it easy for heroes like Tracer and Genji to find and burn down distracted targets. And as a support, you never want to be caught in the dive, not just because you might die, but also because focusing on surviving takes up a lot of your attention. That plus your insufficient LOS makes it really difficult to peel for your team. On top of that too, you'll usually be absorbing heals from your other support, and your team are really going to struggle with neither of you able to help them properly. So instead of clumping up with your supports, you could try insulating your supports. You know, I talk about map control and staging quite a lot. You could maybe think of this as the sort of defensive side of that. The basic idea is that as a team, instead of directly guarding those supports, you protect them by giving them space to work in. Instead of clumping up to try and protect them from enemies jumping in, you instead contest the areas those enemies need to be able to get onto them. Filling the map and having good spacing between your team and your supports is really important for a lot of reasons. First off, as support, it gives you much better LOS. If you have a player skirmishing on a flank, you'll actually be able to help them, as well as spot enemies trying to get around your team. Being outside of the main clump will also stop you from catching unnecessary trash damage. It also means that the enemy team actually needs to stage to be able to dive onto you, and those staging positions that they need for an effective dive, your team will be in a good position to contest using your help from range, meaning you can often stop their attempt at a coordinated engage before it happens. High-level teams really commit to this playstyle, so we often see fights won or lost over these staging areas. But being a little bit outside of the main clump will help you a lot if the enemy do engage. If they just go into your team, you won't be directly caught up in the fight, and will have the literal and mental space to be able to effectively support them. And if they do find a way to get onto you, not only will it be a messy engage as they won't have been able to stage very well, but now your team won't be fully caught up in the dive, meaning that they can freely help you, both with direct peel and with range damage. As well as this, they'll have an option to take advantage of all the enemy attention you're drawing deep by engaging on the enemy supports without being contested. And here we can see those two concepts of catching dives and trading backlines. Two really good tools teams have access to, providing they have that space between themselves and their supports to begin with. There is a lot of nuance and different techniques when it comes to spacing like this, and it's mostly dependent on the comp matchup, but the simplest and by far the most common way of doing it is by setting up a strong side. For once, luckily I've already talked about this, so I'll link it down below. Just to sum it up, although there are some heroes who might individually want to stick close to their support, clumping them up with the whole team really doesn't protect them. Instead, you want to try to insulate them, with your team controlling the areas ahead of your supports that enemies need to be able to threaten them. Remembering to start out with this type of spacing is a really important foundation for good positioning, as it gives teams a lot of options later on in the fight.